The New York Times ran this story, the smaller bombs that could turn Ukraine into a nuclear war zone. A photo released by Russian state-owned news agency showing the Iskander-M launch vehicle being loaded with a ballistic missile during military exercises at a Russian firing range in the, how do you pronounce that? Usuriysk in 2016.
I don't know.
Now, this is great. In destructive power, the behemoths of the Cold War dwarfed the American atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. Washington's biggest test blast was 1,000 times as large. Moscow's was 3,000 times. On both sides, the idea was to deter strikes with threats of vast retaliation, with mutual assured destruction or MAD. The psychological bar was so high that nuclear strikes came to be seen as unthinkable. Today, both Russia and the U.S. have nuclear arms that are much less destructive. Their power just fractions of the Hiroshima's bomb's force. Their use perhaps less frightening and more thinkable. So this is what I was talking about a few weeks ago when I said nuclear war it seems to me to be possible. And
but Tim, it's okay. It's good for the environment. Remember,
a decent
the media
probability
came out and said that it's good for the environment.
Well, that was 10 years ago. I think USA Today had read an op-ed saying a small nuclear war could be good for the environment. So what I'm saying is we might see nuclear artillery. We're going to see Russia will use, in my opinion, if they need to. If they are losing, I would not be surprised if Russia does use nukes. I don't know. Let me make sure I'm clarifying this. I don't know if the probability that Russia uses this is 10% or 2%, 50% or 1%. But Vladimir Putin continually threatens to use nukes as he will not back down. There are a lot of people who fear that NATO doesn't care, they're reckless, or Biden is completely inept. And what we'll end up seeing is Russia, they keep reporting, is being backed into a corner. I don't completely believe that. I think it would be absurd to think Ukraine could beat Russia. Russia's a massive power, even if it's not as big as NATO. It's like half as big as NATO. But if Russia gets pressed, by NATO, they may say, okay, let's land the big guns. Gravity bombs, maybe something not as big as Hiroshima or Nagasaki, but powerful bombs. They're already using the thermobaric bombs. These things are crazy. The missile comes down, ejects fuel, spraying it all through the air, and then sucks all the air up and explodes, like just vaporizing people. So they've already got very, very powerful but lower yield weapons. If Putin had to, I think he would use it. If NATO intervenes, I think it's possible he does. And then I'm worried about what happens to Europe. Will we actually see Russia say, you're not going to nuke us back, we can do what we want? And then, honestly, I was thinking about it earlier because there's a conspiracy theory. Someone predicted a year ago what's happening now. And so this meme's going viral where some guy's like, here's what's going to happen with Russia. And the next step they said was that NATO would get involved. Russia would threaten nuclear weapons. NATO would call their bluff. Russia would say, oh yeah, and then fire a nuke. And then you get nuclear war. I'm not entirely it seems far-fetched, but I also think it would be silly for us at this point. It would be optimism and normalcy bias to think a nuclear war would never happen.
I think specifically you're talking about explosive nuclear weapons too, because the Americans in Iraq in the second Iraq war used depleted uranium weapons because in order to penetrate armor in a tank that's made with the depleted uranium, you need depleted uranium bullets. So they just sprayed them across the desert. They're underground in the desert, irradiating the land.
Yeah, we're talking
that's
about
nuclear war. So
not all nuclear weapons have radioactive yield. That's intentional. So some of them actually don't. Some of them are just concussive shockwaves or explosive. But yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts? Do you think where do you think this goes, and what would you do?
See, all I would say to that is what's to deter Russia from using nuclear weapons?
They want to keep their country intact and they want to keep Ukraine intact.
But do you really think that Russia fears the U.S.? Does Russia fear NATO? Does Russia fear anyone right now? I mean, we were, under Donald Trump, and even Trump came out and said this. Russia didn't act this way. Putin didn't act this way when Trump was in office because Trump was a respected leader, whether or not the left wants to say that or not. Like he was, off the cuff. No one ever knew what was going to happen with him. Look what happened with Soleimani and Iran when they messed with America. Donald Trump, brought down the hammer. Look at Russia right now. They're not fearful of anything. They're not fearful of retaliation because we're not a superpower anymore. I really, would venture to say that. And again, with the whole NATO situation, I'm not a geopolitical expert, so, inform me on this point. But what is really to stop Russia from doing this?
Well, the U.S. is a superpower. The issue is
we're not the anymore per
exactly.
se. We're not the superpower.
The issue, is that Thucydides' trap looms. And there's a conspiracy theory that Western powers for the past 20 years have known Thucydides' trap is a real possibility. And as we've already shown all of you, the liberal world order exists. The Council on Foreign Relations explains this, and they say there will be a new world order. Mm-hmm. One of the theories is that the powerful elites of the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, etc. I mean, these are organizations that outright just say they're doing these things. You can call it a conspiracy. I don't know, whatever. Maybe they're lying. But CFR is NewsGuard certified. They say there's a liberal world order. Now, these people have to be aware of Thucydides' trap, that U.S. is growing. U.S. is a large economic power, the largest, and China is growing as an economic power, and that means World War III is likely. If your intention is to prevent World War III, then you need to stop Thucydides' trap from happening. Well, you can't stop China from growing, so what do? You cut off the tall grass in the U.S. You cripple the United States so that they fall as fast as China rises, and thus you avoid a war. I'm not saying that's true, but I'm saying it's certainly, one theory about the policies enacted by the Biden administration and the Obama administration that have seemingly hurt the United States. And not even them. I mean, George W. Bush and Bill Clinton as well.
Yeah. Well, I don't even believe the narrative that the nuclear war is going to happen. I think it's always possible, right? Everything's possible. Ian might give me $1 million. So
possibly.
It is possible. We never actually know. But ultimately speaking, I think this is to stoke the fear with this idea. If there was going to be a real nuclear attack, I don't think the media would actually be discussing this. I think we'd be in preparation mode and something would be announced with like a genuine understanding. Hey, this is like how they did with Russia, how they go, they're going to invade on this day. Like, this is what's going to happen. And no one heard about this until Russia was going to invade. Now, of course, I joked about it that week. I go, that was the 0-day war, because they kept getting it wrong. And if you leave it up to the Biden administration to literally be stupid enough to like announce the exact day that he knows he's going to invade, as if, Putin's going to be like, okay, I'll go ahead and keep to the date so we don't change our dinner plans. But he ended up invading. He ended up going inside and going, first the peacekeeping mission and then moving forward. But ultimately, everything I hear is about creating hatred, not just for Russia, but for Russians. And the hatred for Russians is why I don't believe the nuclear side. Because anything they can use to get people to distance themselves and recreate an iron curtain, an iron wall between that nation seems to be at hand. And there's one thing I know. Not everyone cares about anything, but everybody knows nuclear war. Especially boomers and people who grew up, and had to do the drills underneath their desks. They're aware of this. They've been around the bush here, and they don't want that. And nobody wants that. And that's why I think they start to say like small nuclear warheads, because the chances of Russia, they know it's ludicrous letting off these megaton warheads. This is not going to happen. So they have to shrink the threat. This is the first time I've ever heard in history, and I might be wrong, where we're talking about micro warheads, and we're back to micro penises and micro warheads. Everything's shrinking back.
We've been talking about this for a few weeks.
No, that's not what I meant. I meant not this story today. I've heard this argument. I meant now it's like where they have to kind of change the threat from something that we've never had this global discussion on micro warheads to like this might happen. And I always feel like with the Ghost of Kiev, Snake Island, the video that came out today that you mentioned on Twitter, it's been nothing but propaganda, to the point that I just put pictures up from my trip in Ukraine and people needed to debunk them. I'm sitting here right now, fast flight.
But the nuclear war angle is actually preventing NATO from intervening.
But I don't think so though, because I think that Putin is pretty, if you watch what his speeches are, not that I would believe everything he says, he's kind of upfront about what he wants. And I think the issue, even if you go back to Noam Chomsky trying to explain what's been happening inside of Ukraine, he's not okay with it being militarized. He does not want it armed. He wants a neutral position between NATO and Russia. He knows these are two different worlds. Could Putin do anything? Anyone could. Because we have a different idea for our society, for our life. It's a whole new movement. He cares about...
Why does he want Ukraine to be neutral?
Because that's right at his border.
So is Estonia and Latvia.
Yeah, but I think Ukraine actually has, I believe they're more corrupted in terms of with our own regime and government. I think it's a puppet arm of the United States.
But Estonia and Latvia are NATO members.
Yes, but I'm saying I think Ukraine specifically, as we're seeing now, I don't know if we're going to donate, with Georgia, I don't know if we're going to really donate arms and really fight as hard as you would think, but Ukraine sits as a middle puppet that we control, that we don't control, but it's still for money laundering, it's a U.S. proxy.
It is, in my opinion, nothing to do with neutrality. Vladimir Putin wants access to their only warm water port in Crimea, and if Ukraine goes EU, they cut Russia off. So Russia moves in through the east. They go into the country. They're effectively trying to bifurcate from the north and the south. Ultimately, I don't know where Putin goes with this. Neutrality is, I believe, part of his goal. I think it has a lot to do with him wanting to maximize energy sales into Europe, which is what essentially helps fund the Russian economy. But I think Crimea, there's a reason he took it instantly. Russia has one warm water port in the Black Sea, one warm water port. It's in the Black Sea. It's Crimea. And they need more than just, going south through Crimea. They need the land bridge to the north. That, I think, is why Putin is doing it.
Okay,
He doesn't care about Estonia and Latvia.
Sure.
Because he doesn't have anything there. He has Kaliningrad. He has access to the Baltic Sea already. So he doesn't care about these other states.
I mean, it's an onion. I think it's multifaceted. And I think if you've seen this, all we've heard about Ukraine the last few years has been American corruption, money laundering, elitist families, and even Trump. You saw that, back that old clip where he's literally sitting with Zelensky saying this is a very corrupt country that deals with massive layers of corruption, meaning we've known this is a problem state. And Putin's been aware of this too. But I'm just saying, when Noam Chomsky and me are agreeing that something's very wrong in the world in general, saying and warning just in 2018, hey, the media has been deceiving the Ukrainian people, Western media, into thinking they can be a Western nation. But it has been understood with Gorbachev on that any sort of push to move Western in Ukraine would end in a bloody war and would end in some sort of aggression from the Russian government. No matter what leader was in power, he was saying they're not going to accept that and they're going to invade. So I'm just saying that they've been duped just like we're standing with Ukraine. I think the Ukrainians don't realize that the proxy that they have and the importance of that position. I believe the West pushed this invasion to be necessary. I don't think if we had pulled out, not installed our own regime, not created a revolution through social media, I don't think this would have happened now. But I do believe that because of the inability for the West and the East to somehow leave some country alone, we can't leave anybody alone. This was going to happen eventually.
You want to know? There's a simple reason why Ukrainians favor the EU, and you know what it is?
What?
Holodomor.
Yeah.
That's really the big. So
it's a really horrifying story.
Russia wants to expand its power. They want the Russian Trade Federation. The EU obviously wants to expand, wants the breadbasket of Europe. When I went to Ukraine and talked to a lot of people, they all said we have the opportunity to either join with Russia and have this trade federation, which would benefit us greatly, or the EU, which would be very similar. And then a lot of people were like, we don't trust Russia because they genocided our people.
Yeah, the Holodomor, a man-made famine convulsed the Soviet Republic of Ukraine from 1932 to 33. How many people died? How many people starved to death?
Isn't it like tens of millions?
So many.
Yeah, because the Soviets had disdain for the Ukrainians as a people and wanted to...
man-made famine,
but didn't in World War II, technically still they gave a lot of their own lives to their troops to defend
million.
Kiev, or to to fight in Ukraine.
The Soviets?
Wasn't there quite a bit of troops they lost?
The Soviets executed all the intellectuals in Eastern Europe, took over. The communists were just like a malignancy of evil.
Yeah, but Russian history goes way before the Soviets. I'm just saying that's obviously a period. But I'm not defending the Soviet time, but I'm saying this idea of a Russian federation of the Russian people. I do believe there is some shared understanding and value. It's not too long ago with
I'm not talking about my opinion on Russia. I'm saying the Ukrainians I spoke with said we don't trust the Russians. We know it happened 20 years ago. What year was the Holodomor? It was like late
32, 33.
I wouldn't trust
between
the Americans
31 and
or the
34.
Russians.
And then you had just the Soviet Union going until only 20 or 30 years ago. So these people are like, nah, not interested. They're like, we'll take the capitalists in Europe for all their faults. So
yeah, but I'm saying I think the media brainwashed them into thinking that could happen. That's my whole point, is that our media, tells us things that are absolutely false. That there was, we were safe in Afghanistan, that it was going to be a smooth pullout, and it wasn't a smooth pullout. It was literally like a, end of prom night, sloppy pullout.
It was a surrender, a literal military surrender.
Right. And they said it wasn't like Vietnam, but it was. I'm saying I do believe that our media, that the influenced by NATO in the West, has tricked them into thinking that they could be a part of the West without a war. And I'm not blaming them. Do whatever the hell you want with your own country. You don't like the Russians? Fine. But just so you know, if you want this, you're going to have the situation on your hand with 10 million refugees. And I'm not blaming the people for getting duped. I'm saying I believe that if this continued the way it did, as we're seeing, it was going to be unavoidable, because Russia wasn't going to put up with it, even if it's for whatever reason you said, or things that we don't know, because I'm not an expert, despite the joke that I'm an Eastern European war expert, because everyone is now. Right. I put a Russia and a Ukraine flag in my bio, so now I know I'm an expert.
Solidarity.
Yeah. I just going to say, I think we'll find out the real point of this as time goes on. And if he's going to push forward, no crap. I'm not going to accept that. I wouldn't accept Russia pushing further into Europe, and I don't think any European country should, and I hope we don't ever get there.
Thanks for checking out this segment from the Timcast IRL podcast. But if you want to check out the full show live, tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. And if you want more special access content, head over to timcast.com and become a member. Your membership helps sustain this company, keep our journalists employed, makes this show happen, and you will get access to exclusive members-only segments of the Timcast IRL podcast, and there's a massive library to check out. So again, go to timcast.com or tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and we'll see you all there.